Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, February 27th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 91 degrees, with a low of 64.6, so expect a warm start to the weekend with plenty of sunshine. Coming up, we'll examine the tensions in U.S. Iran nuclear discussions and how they might escalate into conflict by March. We'll also look at why California educators are rushing to implement AI safety measures in schools following the recent Pippigate controversy. Plus, other key stories on global events, local impacts, and more. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. U.S. Iran tensions are near a breaking point this morning, with diplomacy and war planning happening at the same time. Ethan, let's start with what set all this off last year. What exactly was Operation Midnight Hammer, and what did it really achieve?
That was the joint U.S.-Israeli air campaign in June of last year that went after Iran's key nuclear sites at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. According to coverage in The Guardian and PBS, American B-2 bombers used those huge GBU-57 bunker buster bombs to smash deeply buried enrichment halls. U.S. Defense Intelligence and Israeli Mossad estimates later said Iran's program was knocked back roughly 18 to 24 months. But the technical know-how survived, and that 60% enriched stockpile appears to have been moved into deeper tunnels or even entombed in concrete, so the core problem never really went away.
If the strikes were that powerful, why are we right back on the edge of a new crisis just 8 months later?
Because, as analysts at CSIS and the International Institute for Strategic Studies keep stressing, you can bomb facilities, but you cannot bomb away knowledge. Iran has responded by rebuilding deeper and harder, especially at the so-called Pickaxe Mountain complex near Natanz, which is being dug into a mountain with massive layers of rock overhead. According to think tank imagery that outlets like the Washington Post have summarized, parts of that site may be 100 meters underground, at or beyond what today's bunker busters can reliably reach. So airstrikes bought time, but without a ground invasion or regime change, they did not solve the nuclear issue.
That brings us to the diplomacy trying to use that time. The latest round in Geneva wrapped up just yesterday. Where do those talks stand as of this morning, February 27th?
CNN and Iran International report the third round of indirect talks in Geneva ended yesterday with no breakthrough, and both sides sounding frustrated. The U.S. team, led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and closely guided by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Trump White House, has moved toward what ABC News calls a maximalist wish list. Washington wants key facilities at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan dismantled, all enriched uranium shipped out to U.S. or third country custody, and a permanent agreement with no sunset clauses. In practice, as the Wall Street Journal notes, that comes very close to demanding zero enrichment on Iranian soil.
And what is Iran actually putting on the table in those rooms, beyond the public slogans?
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is offering to dial enrichment back down to 3.67%, the old nuclear deal cap, and freeze there for about 7 years once damaged facilities are repaired. Iran is also dangling economic incentives, including investment rights in its oil and gas sector for U.S. companies, in exchange for sanctions relief and recognition of what it calls its right to peaceful nuclear technology. At the same time, clerics at home are talking much tougher. Iran International quotes Friday prayer leader Ahmad Khatami, saying Iran has never accepted suspension of enrichment and will not accept it, calling suspension, quote, impossible, end quote. And a senior cleric, Lotfola Deshkam, has warned that if negotiations fail, quote, war is the next option on our table, end quote, trying to show Iran is not begging for a deal.
So Geneva ends with big gaps and no deal. What happens next in Vienna, and why do diplomats keep calling that a last off-ramp?
The idea is to shift, at least briefly, from politics to technical details. Starting Monday, March 2nd, just 3 days from now, nuclear experts from both sides and the International Atomic Energy Agency are due in Vienna to hammer out verification rules and inspection access, according to CNN. If they can sketch a workable inspection regime, that could set up a fourth, higher-level political round later in the week. European diplomats quoted by Swiss media describe Vienna as the final technical window before Washington stops pretending this is only a diplomatic crisis and starts deciding on military moves.
Over all of that hangs President Trump's deadline. How tight is the clock he's put on Iran now?
Iran International and The Guardian both note that Trump has given roughly 10 to 15 days after the end of Geneva, which puts the informal cutoff around Friday, March 6th. He has warned that if there is no meaningful agreement by then, quote, bad things happen, end quote, which officials privately admit is shorthand for some kind of strike. CNN points out there is also a military logic. To that date, the U.S. cannot keep two big carrier groups and extra air wings on high alert in the region forever without hurting readiness elsewhere. So there is a shrinking window where the force is in place, and Trump either has to use it as leverage to get a deal or start drawing it down and accept the political optics of stepping back.
Publicly, the rhetoric on both sides is very stark. What do the inspectors and U.S. intelligence actually say Iran is doing at its nuclear sites right now?
The latest annual threat assessments and the IAEA's February report, summarized by outlets like CBS News and The Guardian, paint a more nuanced picture. Since the June strikes under Operation Midnight Hammer, inspectors have not observed industrial-scale enrichment running at Natanz or Fordow. Those halls were described as extremely severely damaged. But the IAEA has been denied access to some bombed or rebuilt areas for more than 8 months, so it cannot certify zero enrichment either. It can only say it has not seen active cascades where it has been allowed in. Rubio has seized on the visible halt to say Iran is, quote, not currently enriching, end quote, while Trump argues Iran is, quote, again pursuing their sinister ambitions, end quote. Intelligence agencies still say there is no hard proof that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has ordered an actual weapons program restarted.
There's also that missing stockpile of 60% enriched uranium that keeps coming up. How big a wild card is that?
Before the strikes, the IAEA had verified about 408.6 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60%, which experts say could be further enriched to weapons grade and used for roughly 5 or 6 nuclear devices. The IAEA now says Iran has not properly accounted for that material since last summer and expresses what it calls grave concern about its whereabouts. U.S. intelligence assessments, reported by PBS and CBS, believe much of it was either moved into deep tunnels at places like Fordow and Isfahan, or literally entombed in reinforced sections during the bombing. The crucial point, analysts tell Al-Monitor, is that if Iran's leadership ever did decide to race for a bomb, having that 60% stockpile already in hand could shorten so-called breakout time to about 1 week.
You mentioned tunnels. Where exactly is Iran rebuilding? And how hardened are these new sites that everyone talks about?
Satellite imagery studied by CSIS and the Institute for Science and International Security, and relayed in The Guardian, shows Natanz's above-ground structures shattered, but massive new excavation at the nearby Pippigate mountain site. Western experts think parts of that complex are more than 100 meters underground, with tunnel entrances covered by thick layers of rock and concrete, making it potentially strike-resistant even to those huge bunker busters. Fordow, which was already dug into a mountain, took major damage but was not destroyed, and a leaked Defense Intelligence Agency memo suggests Iran is stabilizing and reinforcing sections to salvage equipment. Meanwhile, new hardened roofs and buried structures at Isfahan and the old weapons-linked Parchin site make any future inspection or airstrike campaign more complicated and more politically explosive.
Inside the Trump administration, then, what's the actual endgame? Is it simply no bomb, or is it really no program at all?
Reporting from CNN and ABC News suggests even senior officials are still debating that. On some days, the red line sounds like no nuclear weapon, with Rubio focused on preventing Iran from fielding missiles that could reach the United States. On other days, the demands move toward no enrichment of any kind, plus limits on ballistic missiles and on Iran's regional proxy militias in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. Critics quoted in the New Republic argue that this gap between maximalist talking points and what the intelligence community says is realistically enforceable makes it harder for Washington to define what success in Vienna would even look like.
Meanwhile, the military buildup in the region is enormous. Paint the picture of what the Pentagon actually has in place right now.
CNN describes this as perhaps the largest U.S. air naval surge in the region since the 2003 Iraq invasion. The carrier Abraham Lincoln is operating in the Arabian Sea, the Gerald R. Ford is in the eastern Mediterranean, and there are additional destroyers, submarines, and refueling aircraft orbiting nearby. 10 attack aircraft and tankers are flying out of civilian airports in Israel and on Crete, which officials tell ABC News is meant as a very visible signal to Tehran. But Pentagon leaks also talk about shortages of Tomahawk cruise missiles and overdue carrier maintenance, meaning this force is designed for a short, very intense strike campaign, not a months-long war.
With that kind of firepower on station, what options have commanders actually put in front of the president?
According to ABC News and Iran International, Central Command Chief Admiral Brad Cooper and Joint Chiefs Chair General Dan Kane have walked Trump through a menu ranging from limited warning strikes to a sustained air campaign and an Israel-first scenario. Limited precision strikes would hit rebuilt nuclear infrastructure, missile launchers, and some Revolutionary Guard command nodes, trying to punish Iran and delay reconstruction without huge civilian casualties. A weeks-long air war would range wider, into air defenses and maybe even oil facilities, perhaps delaying the nuclear program 5 to 10 years, but almost certainly provoking missile and proxy attacks across the region. The Israel First idea, where Israel strikes first, and the U.S. joins later in the name of defending an ally, might give Trump political cover at home, but analysts on ABC warn it would still look to many in the Middle East like a pre-planned joint push for regime change.
And on the other side, how is Iran answering that buildup, both in its rhetoric and out at sea?
Iran International is full of senior clerics insisting the country is prepared for both war and peace, and that it will choose, as one put it, quote, death with dignity, end quote, over humiliation. Naval commanders are also signaling reach Flotilla 103, including the big forward base ship Makran and the Shahid Matavi warship, has just returned from a 100-day, roughly 13,000 nautical mile voyage that included joint drills off South Africa. The flotilla's commander boasted that some countries tried to block Iran's participation, but that it maintained what he called a strong and effective presence, while vowing to defend Iran's maritime interests to the last drop of blood. Add in live-fire exercises near the Strait of Hormuz and Iraqi militias, threatening to open fronts against U.S. bases, and Washington has to assume any strike could trigger a wider regional contest.
We're also seeing travel warnings and embassy moves. What do those tell us about how seriously other governments take the risk of escalation?
The New York Times reports that the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem has gone to an authorized departure posture, with Ambassador Mike Huckabee emailing staff yesterday to say that anyone who wants to leave should, quote, do so today, end quote, meaning right now on February 27th. The State Department has updated its guidance urging Americans to reconsider travel to Israel and the West Bank, avoid all travel to Gaza, and stay away from border areas that could be targeted if Iran or its proxies respond. On the other side of the world, Xinhua says China is advising its citizens not to travel to Iran and those already there to leave as soon as possible on commercial flights while they still can. When you see both Washington and Beijing nudging their people toward the exits, it is a sign policymakers think the odds of sudden escalation are very real.
Inside Iran, there's already deep turmoil from months of protests and crackdowns. How does that unrest feed into U.S. strategy, and what risks does it carry?
Iran International describes nationwide demonstrations that peaked in January, met by what opposition sources claim is the killing of more than 36,500 people, though those numbers are hard to independently verify. The UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, has condemned death sentences handed down to protesters, including at least 2 children, and called for an immediate moratorium on executions. More than 260 filmmakers and artists have signed a statement saying protest is a natural and civil right, and that, quote, no power has the right to consider itself above the people, end quote, while exiled figure Reza Pahlavi is on social media branding this the Lion and Sun revolution. Analysts at places like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies tell outlets such as The Guardian that some in Washington hope economic pressure and limited strikes could push an already shaky regime over the edge, but they also warn that foreign bombing could rally Iranians, even angry ones, around the flag.
So when you put the pieces together, Ethan, what are the real choices in this next week or two, as Vienna starts and that March 6th deadline looms?
The reporting from CNN, ABC, The Wall Street Journal, and others really comes down to three unappealing paths. One is a narrow deal, where Iran keeps some low-level enrichment under brutal inspections, which would anger hardliners on both sides, but at least lock in longer breakout times. Another is a short, sharp air campaign that delays the program but cannot destroy it, and risks a spiral of missiles, proxy attacks, and oil shocks that nobody can fully control. The third is backing down militarily without a deal, which might preserve peace in the short term, but could be read in Tehran as weakness, encouraging Iran to dig deeper, literally and figuratively, under that mountain at Pippigate.
A dangerous, compressed moment with no easy exits. Ethan, thanks for walking us through it. Our next story looks at how a simple fourth-grade homework project in Los Angeles turned into a statewide fight over artificial intelligence in schools. Reporter Chloe Martinez has been following what parents now call Pippigate. Chloe, start us at the beginning. What exactly happened in that classroom last December?
According to LAist and CalMatters, a fourth-grade class at Delavan Drive Elementary in Eagle Rock got a pretty standard assignment: read Pippi Longstocking, write a report, and design a new book cover. Kids could either draw it or use Adobe Express for Education, a district-approved tool with a built-in image generator powered by Adobe's Firefly models. One girl, the daughter of parent Jody Hughes, typed a straightforward prompt describing Pippi as a red-haired girl with braids and long stockings. Instead of a child-friendly cartoon, the program spit out sexualized images of adult women in lingerie and bikinis on a school Chromebook using a supposedly classroom-safe account.
So this was a district-licensed, kid-branded product. Once those images showed up, how did parents, the district, and Adobe respond?
Hughes showed the images to other parents, and LAist reports they were able to reproduce similarly sexualized results using the same school devices and logins, with equally harmless prompts. A parent group called Schools Beyond Screens quickly organized and went before the Los Angeles Unified School Board, demanding that Adobe Express be pulled from classrooms. LAUSD told CalMatters the images, quote, did not meet district standards, end quote, and said it was collaborating with Adobe on a fix. Adobe's education vice president, Charlie Miller, said they deployed changes within 24 hours, including a more restrictive, G-rated engine for K-12 users, but the company has not detailed what actually changed or allowed any independent testing so far.
And this is not the first time AI has been used in sexually harmful ways around California schools. What other cases are lawmakers looking at?
A big one, often paired with Pippigate in policy debates, happened in 2024 at Beverly Vista Middle School in Beverly Hills. According to case summaries cited by techpolicy.press, several students used so-called AI undressing apps to generate fake nude images of classmates, essentially deepfake child sexual abuse material. At least 5 students were expelled, and more than a dozen victims were identified. Together with Pippigate, that case has become Exhibit A for how generative tools can sexualize children themselves or their likenesses, even when kids are just goofing around. Parents like Hughes also point to national stories about tools such as Grok being used to digitally strip clothing from women and minors as proof that, as she told LAist, this tech can, quote, get real nasty real fast, end quote.
State officials were already working on AI rules for schools before this blew up. What guidance do California schools actually have right now?
In response to laws passed in 2024, including Senate Bill 1288, the California Department of Education convened a working group of about 50 teachers, administrators, technologists, and policy folks. A few weeks after the Delavan Drive incident, in January of this year, They released a document called Guidance for the Safe and Effective Use of Artificial Intelligence in California Public Schools. As LAist and CalMatters explain, it urges what they call human-centered AI, meaning tools should support, not replace, teachers, and it explicitly labels plagiarism and cheating as unacceptable uses. It also tells districts to vet AI tools for bias, safety filters, and privacy under FERPA and COPPA, encourages teachers to use real-world cases like Pippigate in lessons on AI ethics, and repeatedly pushes schools to involve families and communities when deciding what tech to adopt.
That all sounds pretty thoughtful, but how much of it is actually binding on districts like Los Angeles Unified?
Not much, and that is a key tension. The guidance is purely advisory. California has more than 1,000 school districts, and each one can decide whether to adopt any of it or keep doing their own thing. The same working group is supposed to publish more concrete model policies by July of this year, so districts have templates to copy, but even those will be optional. TechPolicy.press and legislative trackers like BillTrack50 note that, in practice, this sets up a patchwork where a kid in one district might get carefully scaffolded AI lessons, while another is essentially a beta tester for vendor products.
And parents at that Eagle Rock Elementary School, especially Jody Hughes, clearly aren't reassured by optional. What are they asking for now?
Hughes and Schools Beyond Screens have come out with a pretty clear line in the sand: no generative image tools for elementary grades at all. They argue that products pitched to schools are not fully tested for child safety, and that the state guidance dodges the developmental question by treating AI as something kids should encounter from kindergarten on. Instead of leaving it to individual teachers or principals, they want the state to say, for example, no text-to-image generators for K-5 period, and to guarantee families a formal right to opt out of school AI altogether. Their broader critique, echoed in LAist coverage, is that districts like LAUSD are essentially relying on vendor self-policing, with very little independent verification.
Beyond safety, equity is a big concern. How are civil rights and education advocates thinking about AI's impact on different communities of students?
Julie Flappin, who runs the Computer Science Equity Project at UCLA's Center X, told CalMatters that Pippigate sits on top of an existing digital divide. She points to research showing that young Black and Latino people are more likely to use generative AI than their white peers, but often attend schools with less access to high-quality computer science or structured AI instruction. That means the youth most exposed to these tools may be the least supported in using them critically, while the tools themselves over-sexualize or stereotype women and women of color. Flappin likes that the state guidance talks about critical thinking, vetting tools, and engaging communities, but she argues it falls short on the practical question: how is an under-resourced district realistically supposed to audit a black box model from a multi-billion-dollar vendor?
Some researchers are also warning about what AI does to learning itself, especially for younger kids. What are they finding?
A January report from the Brookings Institution, based on interviews in 50 countries, is getting a lot of attention in this debate. It concludes that, for now, the documented and potential risks of AI in early grades outweigh the benefits and may undermine the development of core skills like attention, reasoning, and face-to-face social interaction. Charles Logan, a former teacher who now works at a responsible tech lab at Northwestern University, told LAist the California guidance is surprisingly aggressive in normalizing exposure to AI all the way down to kindergarten, while saying nothing about a right to opt out for teachers, parents, or students. He ties that to what he calls an AI inevitability narrative, where resistance is framed as unrealistic instead of a legitimate policy choice.
Governor Gavin Newsom really leans into that inevitability argument, even as he signs some AI safety bills. Walk us through what lawmakers have actually put on the books around kids and AI.
In October of last year, Newsom signed Senate Bill 243, often called the Companion Chatbots Act, and Assembly Bill 316, According to techpolicy.press, Senate Bill 243 applies to AI systems that simulate conversation and companionship, especially those likely to be used by minors, and it requires clear disclosure that users are talking to a machine, along with protocols for self-harm content and what the law calls reasonable measures to keep sexual material away from kids. Child safety advocates like Common Sense Media initially pushed for much tougher standards, and later described the final language as watered down. But it does set a baseline expectation that bots talking with kids should identify themselves and avoid explicit content. Assembly Bill 316, meanwhile, makes it harder for companies to dodge responsibility later by saying, in effect, the AI did it on its own. If an AI system harms someone and you can show causation, the developer or deployer cannot hide behind claims of autonomy.
And there was also a deeper package around deepfakes, cyberbullying, and transparency, right? How does that connect back to cases like Beverly Vista and Pippigate?
Yes, that same late 2025 package included Assembly Bill 621, 772, and 2013. Assembly Bill 621 expands civil remedies for victims of non-consensual, AI-generated sexual imagery, very much a response to deepfake porn cases involving teens, like Beverly Vista. Assembly Bill 772 orders the Department of Education to craft a model cyberbullying policy that explicitly covers AI-generated content, from fake nudes to fabricated slurs, by June 2026, after which districts will have to align their own rules. And Assembly Bill 2013 adds new transparency requirements for certain AI providers, including more disclosure about training datasets, which legal analysts say could give schools and regulators at least a window into what is shaping these models.
So with all that, where does Newsom draw the line? There was one high-profile veto on kids and chatbots that really underscored his stance.
That was Assembly Bill 1064, sometimes called the Lead for Kids Act, which he vetoed last October. The bill would have sharply limited minors' access to online AI chatbots unless companies could show those bots were not foreseeably capable of harmful content, a much stricter standard than the reasonable measures in Senate Bill 243. In his veto message, which techpolicy.press quoted widely, Newsom said, quote, "We cannot prepare our youth for a future where AI is ubiquitous by preventing their use of these tools altogether," end quote. Supporters say that is a realistic view of where the world is headed, but critics like Logan and Schools Beyond Screens argue it treats rapid deployment as a given and families who want to say no as an obstacle.
At the same time, the Trump White House has been trying to rein in stricter state rules with a national framework. How does that affect California's plans?
On December 11th of last year, President Donald Trump signed an executive order titled Ensuring a National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence. Technology law outlets report that it is aimed at creating a more uniform set of rules and could be used to preempt tougher state regulations like California's, depending on how courts interpret it. The California Attorney General and several allied states have already sued, arguing that Washington is overreaching, so a lot of this will play out in federal court over the next few years. For now, though, the advice from education lawyers, according to techpolicy.press, is that districts should behave as if laws like Senate Bill 243, Assembly Bill 316, and the deepfake provisions will stand, both to protect students and to manage their own liability.
You mentioned liability, and Los Angeles Unified has had a rough track record with AI even beyond this fourth-grade book report. Remind us what else has happened there.
Back in June 2024, Superintendent Alberto Carvalho unveiled a chatbot called Ed, promising what he called, quote, the best AI tutor in the world, end quote, built with a company named All Here. Ed was supposed to answer student questions around the clock and help address chronic absenteeism, but within weeks, LAist and national education reporters found it giving inaccurate or inappropriate responses and raised alarms about how it handled student data, so the district quietly pulled the plug. Later investigations revealed that All Here's founder faced fraud allegations, and the company essentially collapsed, which raised big red flags about how LAUSD had vetted a tool that was supposed to sit at the center of its digital strategy. Then, just 2 days ago, on February 25th, federal agents raided Carvalho's home and office. According to education news outlets, that probe appears to focus in part on AI-related contracts, including All Here, and whether there were misrepresentations or mishandling of student information.
And Los Angeles isn't the only district that found AI baked into its system almost by accident. Have others stumbled in similar ways?
Cal Matters points to San Diego Unified as a cautionary tale. In 2024, a majority of its board approved a new curriculum without realizing it included automated AI grading components, meaning algorithms, not teachers, were scoring some student work until trustees discovered it after the fact. Oakland-based equity leader LaShawn Chapman of the National Equity Project told LAist that episodes like that show educators have, quote, a narrow window to set norms before they harden, end quote. Her argument is that those norms need to be co-designed with students and families, not delivered inside glossy vendor pitches or buried in curriculum contracts.
Let's go back to Adobe for a moment. The company insists it fixed the Pippi Longstocking problem within a day. Do we have any real way to know if that's true?
Adobe's Charlie Miller told reporters they had rolled out a more restrictive, G-rated engine specifically for education accounts within 24 hours of hearing about Pippigate. But as of this morning, neither LAist nor Cal Matters has seen any independent cybersecurity firm, AI safety lab, or university center publish an audit showing that the same child-level prompts now reliably produce only age-appropriate images. A Brookings report in January explicitly cited Pippigate as an example of how classroom-safe branding can get ahead of actual safety engineering. Researchers at UCLA and Northwestern also note that Adobe has been tight-lipped about how the education version differs from consumer tools or what training data it used, and separate lawsuits over data sets like the controversial Books 3 corpus have deepened skepticism about the company's overall AI governance.
Outside the classroom, lawmakers are also looking at AI toys and the broader online world children live in. What else is in the pipeline?
Policy coverage from outlets like techpolicy.press says legislators have floated a moratorium on toys with built-in AI companion chatbots for kids, along with tougher student data privacy rules that would, for example, bar companies from using classroom work or school chats to train commercial models. Perhaps the biggest effort sits outside the Capitol altogether, a children's online safety ballot initiative likely to appear next November, backed by Common Sense Media and OpenAI, an unusual pairing of watchdog and AI developer. If voters approve it, it would tighten how platforms collect data, recommend content, and design features for minors, including AI-driven feeds and chatbots that kids use at home as much as they do at school.
We've talked a lot about harms, but supporters of Classroom A, I say there are real upsides too. What are teachers actually finding helpful right now?
Surveys cited by Cal Matters and national education outlets show that a majority of teachers already use AI tools informally, even if their districts do not have formal policies yet. Many lean on them to draft parent emails, generate practice questions, or adapt reading passages for English learners and students with disabilities, which can be a lifeline in understaffed schools. Advocates argue that, when carefully supervised, AI can free teachers from some rote tasks and give students more personalized support, especially in districts that could never afford one-on-one human tutoring at scale. That vision of guided, equitable use is a big part of why the state guidance leans toward teaching kids to think critically about AI, rather than keeping it entirely outside the classroom door.
But the same tools that help can also undermine learning, especially if kids lean on them too much, or if the systems themselves are biased.
Exactly, and that is where research gets sobering. Brookings and others warn that easy access to generative text makes it very tempting to offload writing, problem-solving, even reading comprehension to a chatbot, which can quietly erode the practice students need to build those skills. AI grading systems have been shown to misscore work from multilingual students or kids who use non-standard dialects, often giving confidently wrong feedback that teachers may not catch. And as Pippigate dramatized, image models can sexualize or stereotype women and girls, particularly women of color, even from innocent prompts. So you end up with a tool that decorates a book report and at the same time bakes in distorted ideas about whose bodies look like what.
Given all of that, where does California actually stand this morning? And what big questions are still hanging over this debate?
According to LAist, CalMatters, and TechPolicy.press, the state is walking a narrow middle path. It has aspirational guidance that talks about critical thinking and community voice, a growing stack of laws around chatbots, deepfakes, and corporate liability, and a governor who insists students must learn with AI to be ready for the jobs they will enter. But it has not drawn clear developmental lines about what is acceptable in kindergarten versus high school. It does not guarantee any parent, teacher, or student the right to a low-tech alternative, and it still leaves districts heavily dependent on vendor assurances instead of independent audits. Equity advocates like LaShawn Chapman and Code.org's Mark Johnson say the next frontier has to be investing in teacher training and, possibly, making some level of computer science and AI literacy a graduation requirement so benefits do not just accrue to families who can afford private AI tutors. At the same time, everyone from Brookings researchers to local parent groups is asking whether we can genuinely make these tools safe for children, or whether in some settings, especially early grades, the wiser choice is to simply keep them out.
And that brings us back to that fourth grader in Eagle Rock, just trying to finish a book report. How are people using Pippigate now when they argue over what comes next?
In legislative hearings, school board meetings, and think tank reports, that single Pippi long-stocking prompt has become a cautionary symbol. As LAist put it, this was not a kid searching for something inappropriate. It was a harmless description of a beloved character, typed on a district Chromebook into a tool teachers were told was safe. Parent groups invoke it to argue for hitting pause on generative AI in elementary grades, while vendors and some officials say it shows why we need stronger guardrails and verification, not a retreat from technology altogether. Until California decides who gets to say yes or no to AI in school, and how we measure safety beyond a company's word, that one homework assignment from last December is likely to keep shaping the conversation.
A lot to watch as lawmakers, districts, and families all try to catch up with the technology. Chloe, thanks for walking us through it.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Pakistan's Defense Minister Khawaja Mohammad Asif has declared what he calls an open war with the Taliban government, saying Pakistan's patience has reached its limit after accusing Afghan rulers of exporting terrorism and turning Afghanistan into a colony of India. Islamabad has launched Operation Ghazab Lil Haq, or Righteous Fury, with late-night airstrikes targeting Kabul, Kandahar, and Paktia. Pakistan claims at least 133 Afghan Taliban fighters were killed, while Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid says they have hit back with ground assaults on Pakistani border posts and are still calling for dialogue. Major crossings such as Torkham remain largely shut, trapping refugees and freezing trade, as China, Russia, and the United Kingdom urge both sides to de-escalate before a border clash becomes a region-wide roar. In the latest twist in the streaming wars, Warner Bros. Discovery has decided that when it comes to partners, it is better to Paramount than never. The company's board has deemed a $31 per share, all-cash bid from Paramount Skydance a company superior proposal, effectively sidelining Netflix, which bowed out saying the price was no longer financially attractive. The proposed deal, worth roughly $111 billion, would roll giants like Paramount Pictures, HBO, CNN, and CBS into one Ellison-led empire. Paramount must pay Netflix a breakup fee of about $2.8 billion on Warner's behalf, and there is a further $7 billion regulatory termination fee if watchdogs pull the plug. Even though the Hart-Scott-Rodino waiting period has already expired, heavy antitrust and political scrutiny looms, with analysts bracing for around $6 billion in cost cuts and at least 6,000 job losses as the credits roll on overlapping roles. In Washington, veterans advocates have prescribed a strong dose of regulatory reversal. The Department of Veterans Affairs has formally rescinded its short-lived, evaluative rating impact of medication rule, returning to the prior standard that focuses on the underlying severity of a condition, not how well it is masked by medication. The rule, enacted on February 17 and rolled back today, had sparked more than 18,000 public comments and a federal lawsuit, with critics saying it forced veterans into an impossible choice between following treatment plans and protecting their wallets. VA Secretary Doug Collins' decision aligns with the 2025 Ingram v. Collins precedent, offering immediate clarity for roughly 350,000 pending claims and safeguarding compensation for millions of veterans who feared their benefits might be cut if their prescriptions worked too well. On Wall Street, Block Incorporated is cashing in on artificial intelligence while thousands of workers are being cashed out. The fintech firm, co-founded by Jack Dorsey, is laying off about 4,000 employees, roughly 40% of its staff, arguing that intelligence tools and leaner teams now do the heavy lifting. This comes even as Block's fourth-quarter gross profit jumped about 24% year-over-year to roughly $2.87 billion. Investors swiped right on the plan, sending the stock up as much as 24% in after-hours trading. The restructuring, expected to wrap by the end of the second quarter of 2026, will cost between $450 million and $500 million, with affected staff receiving around 20 weeks of pay and a $5,000 transition fund. Dorsey predicts that within a year, many companies will reach the same conclusion. In the age of AI, payroll is the new code to refactor. And in Germany, the energy transition is getting a tune-up rather than a full reboot. Lawmakers have passed a hydrogen acceleration law, granting hydrogen projects, overriding public interest status, and, in a controversial twist, embracing lower carbon, blue hydrogen from fossil gas as a bridge fuel. At the same time, Chancellor Friedrich Merz's coalition is reworking the Building Energy Act, ditching a strict 65% renewable heating mandate in favor of a green oil and gas quota, starting in 2029. The Federal Network Agency has also launched tenders for 1 gigawatt of bioenergy capacity to provide flexible backup power. Labor figures show unemployment falling by about 14,700 people in February, but still hovering above the politically sensitive 3 million mark. Berlin's broader two-track strategy leans on artificial intelligence and defense as new growth engines, while keeping the 2026 growth forecast at a cautious 1.0%. For the Energiewende, it is less pedal to the metal and more careful clutch control as leaders try to fuel industry without stalling climate goals. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT 5.1, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.